Hey Martin.
Hey Timber, how are you?
Good, good. Just so you know, we are live on YouTube, but we didn't tell anybody, so nobody should be watching at this stage.
That's okay.
But we've had some difficulties recording Zoom sessions with the cloud,
Right.
but it seems to resolve itself if you like record YouTube.
How strange.
I
Okay.
know. Yeah. I just turned on screen sharing, so you should be able to do that. I like your background, by the way. It's very
I've
pleasing, the ombre.
yeah, I've been fooling around with various setups here. I'm still on Linux, so so everything is working right now, and I'm just not going to touch anything, and hopefully it'll stay working. But if you do put in a bit of time, you can do. Yeah, it's easy to do all these sorts of things.
Are you running Linux on a PC or a Mac?
Yeah, PC. I have a old-fashioned built myself PC on a desktop here. So yeah, I was an Apple person. I was using Macs for everything, and just gradually over the years got more and more frustrated with some of the kind of developer limitations they have. So I bit the bullet and just went all in, build your PC, install Linux, do it all from scratch. And yeah, I'm slowly getting there. I used to use it when I was in college, but then I stopped using it, and it kind of took me a while to get back into it again. But I'm getting
Yeah,
there.
my brother's big on the build your own PC train. I don't quite understand how he's built his rig, but he took a lot of enjoyment and frustration from it. So it's quite the ordeal.
Yeah, yeah. Like you kind of have battle scars after it. You know, you hit up against all these weird issues, but then solving them is gratifying, and you kind of think, you know what, I won't get caught with that again. But then another issue comes up, so it kind of keeps going.
Yeah. Do you know if there's a book like The Zen of Motorcycle Maintenance, but The Zen of PC Building?
I wonder, yeah. Not that I know of now. Um, I don't think so. No, I think it's all like there's subreddit communities and things like that are quite good. Um, but I don't think there's any book. It would probably date pretty fast anyway.
Yeah, it would date fast. It also feels like the wrong medium. Like motorcycles add these
Yeah,
manuals and stuff, but Reddit feels like a better
Reddit
medium.
Reddit works really well. Like I still browse the PC self build subreddit, and like occasionally you get people posting pictures of something they've done, but it's obviously wrong. And I mean, they're hilarious. Like you'll see people installing whatever the new kind of SSD cards, and they're obviously bent. You know, they've tightened the screw and they haven't put in the little lift underneath it, and you just want to shout at them like, quickly take it out. You know, it's on the verge of snapping. But yeah, they're good.
Yeah, there must be some real screw ups on that channel.
Can I just check something real quick? You can see my screen share there, the slide, right?
Yep.
And if I switch, now you can see my browser, right?
Yeah, I see Venice chat and the
Grand.
whole
Yeah.
dashboard.
It switches back and forth. Okay, that's cool.
Do you want to do breakout rooms or anything? Anything I can set up in advance?
No, I'm going to do it all. I have a Google sheet that they can fill out, and I will be switching to like live demos with an LLM and stuff. But I'll keep it all in the same room, I think,
Okay, great.
and see if they fill that in. So yeah, should be straightforward. Let's see.
Cool. Cool. I'm excited for this one. Yeah, Giovanni's class was good too. It was like it could have been a 6 hour lecture. He was going so fast. He had so much content
Yeah,
just piled
yeah.
in there.
Yeah, I'm going to be the opposite here. So I don't have a ton of content, and I'll be taking it kind of slow, and we'll be spending quite a bit of time doing this LLM exercise, I think, in the middle. So yeah, it should be a little bit lighter, I think. People have been working all day, right? I've been checking in and out of the Discord, and they seem to be quite active. So they might be.
Yeah. I think that low content and a thorough review of it is probably the way to go at this stage of the day for
Yeah.
people.
Okay. Well, that's what I have anyway. So
Perfect. Your guys' university logo is quite nice.
Yeah, they brought in one of these branding agencies and like did the whole gathering feedback at the start as to what we wanted. But I was quite impressed with the outcome at the end of it. It works, and they explained it to us. So there's meant to be so there's a light bending thing here. So there's a U obviously for university, but you also have like the rays of light kind of hitting it at different angles and making it visible. And there was lots of thinking went into it behind it. So um, yeah, I think it worked. Yeah, it's a pretty good logo as far as logos go, college logos at least.
Let me make a discussion thread for this course.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. You know, it's funny you mentioned that Samuel's on like a North American sleep schedule. Is my Wi-Fi cutting out again?
No.
Okay, all
Yeah.
good.
Yep.
Um,
I think he's in Sydney, right? So that's 15, 16 hours ahead. Yeah.
yeah, there's a guy at my co-working space who's like he works really weird hours, and I was like, "Hey, are you like working on a different time zone?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm on like Eastern time, and I have a European team too, so he's there at like 5 a.m. every day, so early."
5:30 is my normal wake up time. It's late now.
I have a friend who's going to be doing that, not for remote work, but for commuting and avoiding LA traffic for the days he has to go to the office.
Yeah, I had a boss who did that. She would come in at yeah about 6 a.m. every day, and she'd leave around 2 just because traffic was horrendous.
Looks like we have a slightly different crowd joining. Sam is joining from Kuala Lumpur, a couple more people. Yeah, I think we're going to have people self-sorting by time zone for the morning versus afternoon versus evening classes. That would be funny if your subset of courses that you end up taking is a function of where you live.
I bet we'll see um, at least 2 kind of like types of certificates where there'll be like that first row of morning courses like missing, or the evening courses. It's also it's fun as well that Sam's calling in, and he's typically in a classroom with a bunch of people. So there are satellite campuses for the protocol school.
Yeah, and tomorrow's fiction workshop, the Weird Water fiction workshop, which is I think at 10 a.m. Pacific, that's going to be run out of Sam's location in Kuala Lumpur. So it's not, I don't think there's a satellite that there's like no central location for anybody to orbit. It's all satellites.
It's true. I'm confident too that if somehow there was like a weird meteor that managed to strike like the West Coast hub over here, the Kuala Lumpur hub could pick it up and run the rest of the show. Well, we're at about 25 participants. I say we give it 2 minutes, Martin, and then you can take it away.
Sure.
I made a great joke earlier, but it didn't work because my internet cut out. But I was trying to ask Giovanni like what the standard was for Italian students showing up on time or not. Like, yeah. And I assume I don't know about Irish students. Like I would compare, depends like if it's a morning session, pub culture in Ireland is pretty sophisticated. So
Yeah, it's hard to generalize. I would say, with respect to Europeans, we're probably middle of the road. There's definitely a couple of nations that would beat us, but we're definitely ahead of a couple of others. So I'd put us somewhere in the middle, I think, in terms of punctuality and being at places when we're meant to be.
it's a good place to be. I think either extreme is a little intense.
Yeah, there's definitely one or two I could point to that would be after us, I think.
Okay, you want to get started? I'll hand things over.
Sure, let's go. Okay, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. So my talk today is called Beyond Consensus, Protocols as Digital Institutions. I'll come back to this in a moment. First, I want to very briefly introduce myself. So my name is Martin Harrigan. I am a Summer of Protocol 25 teaching fellow. For my day job, I'm a lecturer, researcher, and software engineer. I've kind of switched between these roles at various points. Currently, I teach cryptography and blockchains modules at both undergraduate and postgraduate level at a university in the southeast of Ireland, the Southeast Technological University, or SETU. You can see the location of our campuses there on the bottom right. So we sort of cater for the southeast of the country. We're outside the sort of larger population centres like Dublin and Cork. It's a newish institution. You very likely haven't heard of it. It was formed in the last 3 or 4 years by merging some of our smaller institutions that have been around since the 1970s. So this is something that we've done across the country. Many of our smaller higher educational institutions have merged to create these slightly larger entities. So hopefully you'll come across the name a bit more in the future. I teach one module in particular that's called Blockchains and Decentralized Systems. So this is a very typical computer science type module. Students would have completed a cryptography module before that. It's your typical semesterized module, 12 weeks of lectures, 12 weeks of practicals. And one of the reasons that I'm interested in protocol studies is I want to sort of splice protocol studies into the middle of the content that I cover in that module. So I show you the content there along the bottom. We cover things like peer-to-peer networks, wallets, keys, addresses, transactions, blocks, consensus protocols. And then normally we sort of switch gear at that point and talk about more higher level things like smart contracts, smart contract development, tokens, fungible and non-fungible, decentralized finance, decentralized governance, scalability, and so on. And I want to get protocol studies into the middle there, in part because I want to sort of broaden the notion in students' heads as to what types of protocols they can create using these systems. So when they're developing their smart contracts, we usually actually do some smart contract development there. And I guess umpteen variations on the Vault Manager and things like it. And so I'd really like them to think a bit broader as to the types of systems they could implement there. And protocol studies, I think, is one way to do that. Now, in what I'm going to talk here today, I won't be referring to either blockchains or decentralized systems much, but this is just to give you a little bit of context of where this fits in. Okay, so secondly, and maybe more importantly, who are you? So who am I speaking to? So I'm going to use a Google Sheet here that we're going to fill out as we make our way through this. So if you visit this URL now, so tinyurl.com/protoschool, I'll just bring it up here. So you should bring you to a Google Sheet that looks something like this. And if you just stay to the first tab at the moment, just fill in a row there, and you don't have to give away any identifying details. I mean, we have lots of details about you already. I want something like why you're interested in protocol studies. So for me, I'm a teacher who wants to teach students about protocols in a broad sense. What do you want to do? So just go ahead and fill that in. Okay, great. I can see those coming in. Right, great. So back to what I'm speaking about here. So here's a brief outline of what I want to cover. So firstly, I'm going to again sort of introduce you to protocol studies from the perspective of a computer science cryptographer, blockchain type person. And then we're going to look at producing LLM context for protocol studies. So I'm going to use everyone's favorite tool today, LLMs, in order to learn a little bit more about protocols. And in order to do that, we're going to produce some context that we can give an LLM so that it can interact with us about protocols in a better way. So if that doesn't make sense for now, don't worry, it should become clearer shortly. Then we're going to look at a framework for analyzing protocols. And then we're going to do an LLM-based exercise. So LLMs are popping up here again. We're going to use LLMs to interrogate and inspect properties of protocols. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have some discussion because we'll see what sort of results we can get from the LLM-based exercise. So another sort of graphical way of picturing this is what I hope to do. So at the top here, it's just me. So I'm giving myself the role of a teacher here. So I'm going to start by generating some LLM context for protocol studies. I'll describe how that works. It doesn't actually matter too much how it works, the detail, because you're just going to take the output of this and use it in your steps. So I'll go through the process that I use to generate it, but then you'll be taking the output and building on top of that. I'm going to choose the framework that we're going to use to analyze protocols. And then I'm going to hand it over to you. So then each student is going to do the following steps. You're going to load the context into your favorite LLM, whatever it is. You can use ChatGPT, Claude, whatever you're comfortable with. It doesn't actually matter that much. Then you're going to choose a protocol that you're interested in, or you can pick one from a list that I give you. And then you're going to role play this protocol with the LLM. So you and the LLM are going to enter into this conversation where you're playing out the protocol. And then finally, you're going to analyze the protocol that you just participated in using the framework. And hopefully at the end, then we'll gather together all our results, discuss them, and reflect back on this entire framework for analyzing protocols, whether it makes sense, whether it's useful, whether we can improve it somehow. Okay, again, if things are not clear for now, do not worry. I'll go back through all of this again. Okay, so we'll start right at the top, and I'll just do this very brief introduction to protocol studies from the perspective of a computer scientist, cryptographer, blockchain type person. So in cryptography, we already have protocols, and we have this very narrow definition of a protocol. So on the left here, I have a picture that I use in a slide when I'm describing the Diffie-Hellman protocol, it's called. This is a foundational protocol in cryptography that allows two people to agree on a shared secret value. So the details don't matter here, but you can kind of guess, I think, from the diagram here, you have two actors playing two different roles, Alice and Bob, and time proceeds top down. So these two lines are swim lanes sort of represent the progression of time. And as we go through the protocol, Alice and Bob are performing calculations. So you can see the calculations being performed on either side. And every so often, they compute a value, and they send those values across. So Alice, for example, computes this value, big A. She sends it across to Bob. At the same time, Bob is computing this value, big B, and he sends it across to Alice. And then they engage in some more computations, and they compute this value K. And if everything works just right, if they follow the program precisely and exactly, and everything is obeyed to the letter, they will both arrive at this value K that only they know. So if Eve is listening into the middle here, even if she observes all the values being sent back and forth, she will not know the value of K. Okay, again, the detail doesn't matter, but I just want to show you this very narrow sense in which the word protocol is used within cryptography. Now, within protocol studies, where we have this much broader sense of what we mean by protocol, I've listed out some example protocols here along this spectrum. So at the very bottom, you have simple things like handshakes and maybe hosting a dinner party. As you move up, you get to community protests, prescribed burns, electing a pope, even international trade agreements. So this is a much, much broader definition of what we mean by protocol. And in fact, I'll just mention that there's a talk later this week, I think it's on Thursday, called Designing Trust, Protocol, Society, and Web 3.0. And in that, Helena Rong will be specifically discussing this difference between protocols at the micro, meso, and macro scales. Okay, now for people who study cryptography and blockchains specifically, this idea of a word changing its definition and expanding over time is familiar. Blockchain is another great example of this. So in the narrow sense, and actually if you trace back to where the word blockchain came from, it's very easy to identify where. So it appeared for the first time in the Bitcoin source code. And at that point, a blockchain was a data structure in the C++ programming language that represented this chain of cryptographically hashed blocks. In other words, it was a very precise thing, a technical definition that really only programmers were interested in. But then, of course, over the years, we've had this widening in definition. And now when someone says blockchain, they mean it in a much broader sense. And now it's become more an assemblage of parts. So again, this is a diagram I use quite often in a blockchain module that I deliver. You have these various constituent parts like timestamps, logs, peer-to-peer networks, smart contracts, wallets, and consensus protocols. And if you put all of these ingredients together in just the right way, you can create a blockchain-based system or a blockchain. So this idea of a term like kind kind of expanding over time is familiar to us. Now, for some people in an area, this can be annoying. Like for people who study the blockchains, to see this happening can become frustrating, because then when you hear the word, you need to clarify what people mean by it. But I think it's inevitable as something becomes more mainstream. Okay, so back to protocols. So if you want to study protocols in the broader sense, what do you do? And I mean, the best thing to do, I think, is to go to the Summer of Protocols website and, you know, read the protocol reader, join the Discord group, read the conversations, take the protocol school. I mean, these are all ways of broadening, of improving your understanding of protocols in this broader sense. Now, I'm going to take a different approach here. I'm going to try and do this a little bit more systematically, and I'm going to try and get a computer to basically do this for us. Now, this is not a substitute. Obviously, the best way for you to learn about these things is to, you know, join the community, engage, read the papers, and so on. But bear with me for a moment, because you will see that, like, I have a reason for doing this that hopefully will become a little bit clearer.
Can't even get the number to close.
Okay, so I've created this pipeline here. It's an LLM-powered pipeline. And what it does is it tries to produce a conceptualization of protocol studies automatically and systematically. So the idea here is to take some source. In this case, I'm going to take the Summer of Protocols YouTube channel, and from that extract a conceptualization of what we mean by protocol studies. So I'll go through the detail first of how this pipeline works, and then I'll show what we can use it for. So at the top here, I have the first stage, which is simply transcribe the entire contents of the Summer of Protocol YouTube channel. So at the time I did this, which was a couple of weeks ago, this was 80 videos. I think we're up to 81 or 82 videos now. It's 720,000 spoken words and growing, of course. And you can easily transcribe all of this today locally on your computer in a couple of hours using models like OpenAI's Whisper. And so the output of this first stage, this kind of preparatory stage, is simply text files of everything that was said in these YouTube channels. Or sorry, in this single YouTube channel, but in all the videos that are part of it. Okay, step 2 then, we perform some analysis on this. So what we want to do is we want to try and extract what I'm calling here the foundational ideas. So the foundational ideas in this text relating to protocols. And then we're going to try and aggregate these into more higher level ideas, aggregated ideas, and then we'll be able to do some exploration with that. Now, the way we do that, it's all inside in stage 2 here. I'm not going to go through the technical detail, but we start by extracting the foundational ideas directly from the text. We can do that quite easily with an LLM. Then we generate text embeddings. So we convert these foundational ideas into high-dimensional vectors. And then we can perform principal component analysis and hierarchical clustering to try and group these. And then we can identify the groups or the clusters, and again use an LLM to give them labels. So what is that cluster all about? What's the first cluster about? What's the second cluster about? And so on. I'll show you a picture of what this output looks like in a moment, and a little bit further along, I'll show you what the actual output is, because you'll be using it yourself in the exercise later on. Now, once you have produced these clusters and labeled them, you can try to visualize them, which I'll show you in a moment, or you can also do some further exploration. So, for example, you can try and identify conflicting ideas. So, in other words, if you were to go through all of the transcripts of the Summer of Protocol YouTube channel and extract the ideas that occur in that source material, would you find conflicting ideas or not? And if you do, can you identify those and trace them back to their original occurrences in the source material? Okay, so there's lots of other explorations you could do here. When I presented this before, someone mentioned that you could, for example, use multiple sources. You could take the YouTube channel, but you could also take the reader and the contents of Discord and extract the foundational and aggregated ideas from those and do a sort of a diff, like do a comparison to see, are there things that we talk about in Discord, but we don't talk about on the YouTube channel for some reason, and vice versa. Yeah, there's lots of possibilities here. A couple of years ago, if you were to do this stage 2 type analysis here, this involved kind of putting together a kind of a hodgepodge of smaller tools. Nowadays, you can do this all with LLMs. So LLMs have sort of taken over here. I did this all locally using Geometry and Nomic Embed. But you know, pick your model. There's lots of possibilities here. Again, I'll mention there's an SLP guest talk later this week, Wednesday, I think. The speaker is introducing a system for LLM-powered data processing known as DocETL. The pipeline I have here was definitely inspired by this. I read the DocETL paper some time ago, and it's really eye-opening and useful, and has some very advanced techniques that I didn't use. But I think this idea of LLM-powered pipelines using familiar operations like map, filter, reduce, and so on is very useful, and has some interesting applications. Okay, so I'll try and visualize what the output is here. So on the left here, I have a very crude 3-dimensional representation of these fundamental ideas plotted in 3D space, and they've been clustered, and the different colors represent the different clusters. And the LLM has then gone through these clusters and looked at the foundational ideas within each cluster and tried to produce a label that describes that entire cluster. So for example, the red cluster, which only has 1 or 2 nodes, I think, that's talking about layering. The complexity cluster is talking about complexity. You have a foundations cluster, an agency cluster, and so on. So all of these are the aggregated ideas that were extracted from the SLP YouTube transcripts. Now, I'll just make a note here at the bottom that, I mean, it's nice to see this 3D projection, I think. Like, we as humans like to see these types of things, and I think we look at them trying to find patterns and things like that. But that's fairly futile. This is a 3D projection. It captures less than 20% of the variance in the data. In other words, the real patterns, critical patterns here, reside in higher dimensions that we just can't visualize. So I wouldn't spend too long looking at that, trying to make sense of it or spot interesting patterns. You really have to go to higher dimensions, and then we can't visualize it, unfortunately, at that point. But we can do some useful analysis. So for example, you can pick a cluster, and you can kind of drill back down again, and you can try to identify the fundamental ideas. So for example, I took the layering cluster and had a look at what fundamental ideas are part of that cluster. And I'll let you read them here. Okay, so these are 3 fundamental ideas that were extracted from the YouTube transcripts that relate to layering. Now, these are not quotations. These are not like utterances from individual videos. We haven't gotten that low level yet. These fundamental ideas are themselves extracted or kind of summarized from what people said. But I think they're reasonably good. Like, I think it has got a grasp here of what layering means in the context of protocol studies, and the fundamental ideas show that to some degree. We can go a bit further. So we could ask a question like, what are the conflicts within layering? And it identifies this one here. This emphasis on slow evolution and stability in lower layers conflicts with the need to constantly rationalize and build broadly at all layers. to foster ecosystem growth. Okay, I think a reasonable conflict has identified there. And then we can start to drop back down to the actual transcripts, and we can say identify instances of such conflict in those original transcripts. So there's one here that I was kind of familiar with. It relates to academic funding. So the conflict that it identified was that academic funding and the publication system emphasizes stability by favoring dominant paradigms, which blocks high-risk frontier research and discourages exploration outside established hypotheses, which I think is true. And many others agree with this also. For example, Dyson's paper from some years ago. There's many others. I'll let you have a quick read through them there. So these are more conflicts that were identified in the original transcripts relating to the idea of layering with respect to protocol studies. Okay, so there's a mixture of topics in there. Some of them I'm not that familiar with. The first one maybe is the only one I'll comment on because I'm a little bit familiar with EigenLayer and its design. So it has identified this conflict within EigenLayer. EigenLayer assumes a fixed model of the world for identifying intersubjective faults, limiting flexibility and adapting to changing fault definitions, which I think is true. Like if you look at EigenLayer, you have these AVSs. And if you want to adapt or change these fault definitions, you really need to deploy a new AVS, as far as I know. So this seems like a reasonable example of a conflict that it has identified with respect to layering in protocol studies. Okay, we've gone very deep here, but what I want to show you is you can use this pipeline to go from the source material, the YouTube transcripts. You can get all the way from there up to fundamental ideas and up to these aggregated ideas at the highest level. And then you can drill all the way back down again and perform all sorts of queries looking into what these aggregated ideas are, looking for conflicts within them, and so on. So yeah, lots of possibilities here, I think. Okay, so I want to talk about a little bit more precisely what is the output of this pipeline. So what exactly does it produce, and then how are we going to use it? So it turns out you can see for yourself. So if you want to inspect the output of this, if you go back to that Google Sheet on the second tab there called links, the second link there has a link to a JSON file. And this is the output of this pipeline. So you can open it up, you can take a look, you can download it yourself. We will be using it shortly. So it's simply a JSON file that contains all of the fundamental and aggregated ideas extracted from the Summer of Protocol YouTube channel. It's reasonably small, so 76 kilobytes or about 13,000 LLM tokens. The reason I'm sizing it that way is because we will be inserting it into LLM context windows shortly. So that's a reasonable size. I mean, context windows today, even the free ones are of the order of 100,000 tokens. So using 13,000 tokens to give it this little bit of context at the beginning isn't really a problem. But this piece of context is very useful. So I'm going to try and demonstrate to you how you can use something like this with your favorite LLM. Okay, in order to do that, I'm going to define this term here that's quite popular within the protocol studies community. The first link is broken. Okay, to the side. Sorry, I'll fix that. Yeah, it's okay. We can work without that anyway. So in order to try and demonstrate how this piece of context is useful, I'm going to define this term hardness that's quite popular in protocol studies, and then I'll use this in the demo. So hardness, if you haven't come across it already, was defined in this paper by Joshua Stark, Atoms, Institutions, and Blockchains, which again is in the protocol reader. It's well worth a read. He defines hardness as the capacity of a system to make something very likely to be true in the future. And he gives examples of systems that can do this. So the physical world, atoms, human institutions, and blockchains all have this capability. They are all sources of hardness. So what this means, if we take blockchains for an example, to give a very simple example, if you were to transfer some Ether into a fresh Ethereum address, then there's a very strong guarantee that that Ether will still be there in 10 years' time. Okay, that's like a source, that's a guarantee that the Ethereum system gives you. And this guarantee, this hardness then allows you to build on top of that, because this is a strong foundation that you can then use to build more advanced things. So we can use this hardness to create money, laws, governance, things like that. Okay, so I'm going to switch to a quick demo here to try and illustrate to you how we can sort of investigate the notion of hardness using our protocol context JSON file. Okay, so I've switched over to my favorite LLM here. It's Venice. It's really just a packaging up of some open source LLMs. There's nothing particularly special with Venice. If you want to use yourself ChatGPT or Claude or even Copilot works perfectly fine here. That will work too. And what I want to show to you, so I want to show to you how you can use this protocol studies context file. So if we start first with a brand new conversation, no context, and if I ask it, what is a protocol? Okay, and it's always risky doing software demos. It's even riskier doing software demos that involve LLMs, because sometimes they don't behave as they did even an hour before. But anyway, so when I ask it what is a protocol, you get the sort of stock computer science type definition. You know, it mentions things like HTTP, TCP, IP, and so on, and talks about the details of those. Okay. If we ask it what is hardness in the context of protocols, it doesn't have any idea, or it doesn't at least have the protocol studies notion of hardness. So it goes off, it makes a pretty good guess. And it talks about the notion of hardness that comes from computational complexity, which is something different altogether. And it kind of guesses that maybe that's what we mean, but it's not. And so what I want to try and do is I want to try and improve this. So how could I get it to answer in the context of protocol studies, in the context of this body of knowledge that the Summer of Protocols group has produced? Okay, so I'll start a new chat again. So I'm going to just clear all of this. We'll start fresh. But before I kick this off, I'm going to load in that JSON file. So there's various ways of doing this with different LLM web interfaces. But even if they don't have a special feature for doing it, you can do it directly by just adding an attachment. So I'm going to add an attachment here, upload a file, and I'm going to just add that JSON file directly. And just to make sure that gets processed okay, I'm going to say, add the attached to the context window, respond with ACK when ready. It takes a second, and it comes back with ACK. Okay, great. So that piece of context has now been added to the context window. Now remember, this is simply just a list of fundamental ideas and aggregated ideas that we extracted from the SOP YouTube channel. Now we'll repeat those same questions again. So if I ask it, what is a protocol? I get the broader definition. So I get the definition that you might find in the protocol studies community rather than the one you get from the cryptography or the computer science community. And if I ask it, what is hardness? I'm getting this notion of hardness that was defined by Joshua Stark in that paper I mentioned earlier. Okay, so the context here is sort of guiding the conversation to prioritize protocol studies. And very often that's what I want. So I often go to LLMs now and talk about some concept relating to protocols. And the first thing I always have to do is I have to say, no, wait, I don't mean protocols in the kind of traditional computer science sense. I mean this broader definition of protocols. And I might say something like it's an engineered argument because it's quick and short to type. But if you use this piece of context, you can kind of skip all that and get better answers, because the LLM is kind of guided towards the protocol studies notion of things. And so when you ask it things then like, what is a protocol? What is hardness? You get a kind of a better answer in some senses. Okay, so you should be able to do that yourself using whatever LLM you might use. I'll just note that some LLMs do offer kind of additional functionality for getting that piece of context into the system prompt rather than the user prompt. So the idea here, if I show you just how you do it with Venice, I'll start a new chat again. And if here it's under settings, I can actually keep a list of system prompts here and I can turn them on and off. So I've added in the protocol studies one. So if I just turn that on, that's as if I uploaded the JSON file and had it added to the context window. And once it's turned on, you can then go and ask it, what is a protocol? What is a hardness? What is hardness? And it'll base the answer on that context. The nice thing here, of course, is that you can have multiple pieces of context that you can turn on and off and combine in various ways. So if you were looking at the intersection of protocol studies and some other subject, you could very easily do that and just use those pieces of context. Okay, but even if your LLM web interface doesn't have this kind of facility, you can just upload the attachment and tell it to add it to the context window. If anyone wants to ask a question at any point, just open your mic and interrupt me. Go ahead. I'm looking at some of the chat in Discord and Zoom, but I might miss some of the questions. So if there's anything, feel free to stop me and just interrupt. Oh, and raise your hand. Yeah, as Timber said, so one of us can unmute you. Okay, I'll just note too before I go on that this sort of approach isn't just useful for protocol studies. So the only thing specific to protocol studies here was the particular YouTube channel that we used at the start. You could easily point it to another YouTube channel and develop a piece of context that's specific to that, and then use that in your conversations with LLMs or intersect it with the protocol studies context and so on. So there's lots of possibilities here, I think, and it can be very, very useful just to get your LLM on track before you get into deeper things. Okay, so that's our first ingredient. We will be using that again, so you can just keep it handy. Now, the second ingredient, the second thing we're going to need for our LLM exercise is a framework for analyzing protocols. And we can base, there's lots of possibilities here, but one starting point here, I think, is this paper, The Unreasonable Sufficiency of Protocols, which again, you can find in the protocol reader. And what it does is it enumerates 10 properties of a good protocol. Okay, I'm oversimplifying here a little bit, but that's basically what it does. And those properties have names like constrained, generative, learnable, legible, ludic, stewardable, defensible, evolvable, mortal, and legitimate. So the claim is that good protocols have these properties. Now, this can form the basis of a framework for analyzing protocols. So the idea here is that we should be able to show that a protocol X has property Y. So to give a particular example, say I'm interested in the protocol hosting a dinner party. Okay, so that's the protocol I'm trying to analyze. That's what I'm interested in for whatever reason. Then could I show that the hosting a dinner party protocol is, say, defensible? Pick one of those properties from the list here and try and demonstrate that. So how would I go about showing that the hosting a dinner party, which I believe is a good protocol, has the defensible property? And I think, again, the answer is, or one answer is to use LLMs. So it turns out that one of the strengths of LLMs is role-playing. They're very versatile role players. They're being used in games and the like quite a bit. But we want to use LLMs here as a sort of a sparring partner in order to investigate protocols. So the idea here is the LLM is going to play one role in the protocol, and we're going to play another. And we're going to try and steer the conversation towards a subset of the state space that demonstrates some property, say defensibility. Okay, again, I'll give an example very shortly to try and clear that up. I'll also note here just for a moment that this isn't vibe coding. So vibe coding is seems to be a very popular endeavor at the moment. We're not getting an LLM to produce a piece of software that's going to, enact or play out a protocol. It's even worse than that. So it's even more low fidelity. We're getting the LLM to pretend that a system exists and that the protocol is running and to play a part in that. And then we're going to converse with it, playing another role in that same protocol. Okay, I'll give an example and it should clear this up. So on the right here, I have Kevin. Kevin is a dinner host powered by an LLM. So I have produced a prompt that basically gets Kevin to behave the way I want him to behave. And what Kevin does is Kevin tries to host dinner parties. So the pieces of text here on the right, that's me talking to the LLM, and Kevin is the LLM responding. So we can just play out the typical flows. So I walk up to the door of the house and ring the doorbell. Kevin responds, "Welcome, I'm Kevin, and I'm thrilled you could make it. Please come in, make yourself at home. Let me take your coat." He makes a blunder here. So he says, "You look absolutely stunning, by the way." So he's missing a kind of a vital piece of context. That's not normally how I would be greeted. And then he tells me, then he tells me that other guests would be arriving soon. But first, let me introduce you to someone you might know. Okay, so far, so good. I ask to use the restrooms because I just completed a long trip, and he says, "Sure, you can find it down the hall. I'll be here greeting the other guests, pouring some drinks. When you return, take your time." So we're up and running here. We're playing out this hosting a dinner party protocol, Kevin taking on the role of the host and me taking on the role of a guest. Now, can we try and demonstrate one of those properties, or how might we go about doing that? So I'll pick a property here. I've picked the defensible property. If you haven't read the paper, don't worry. I'll have some very brief definitions of the different properties in the Google Sheets document that we'll be working with later. So we're looking at the defensible property, and that says that a good protocol resists capture by particular groups, endemic exploitation by hostile parasitic elements, cronyism, gaming, and runaway extraction. So in other words, can I thwart Kevin's ability to host a dinner party effectively, or will Kevin, and by extension the protocol, be able to defend against that? So I'm going to try and do something malicious. I'm going to try and disrupt his ability to host this dinner party. So this was my attempt here. I locked the door of the restroom after he directed me there. I stay in there. I refuse to leave. And of course, at some point, the other guests are going to need to use the restroom. Kevin responds. I'll quickly pop next door and ask the neighbors if my guests can use their restroom. I'll be right back. So this seems like a pretty good defense. I mean, the dinner party can continue. despite my best efforts, this has not disrupted Kevin's ability to host the party, and presumably everything can just continue on. Okay, I hope that illustrates the idea. Now, I've left a lot of things unsaid yet. You know, some of the properties are easier to demonstrate than others, but this is the basic idea. We take a protocol, whatever protocol we want, we role play it with an LLM once the LLM has been properly prompted, and then we try and steer the conversation to demonstrate these properties of a good protocol. Okay, so we'll try and put all this together. We get now to the LLM-based exercise. So what I want you to do is I want you to choose a suitable protocol. I'll explain what I mean by suitable in a moment. And then you're going to create a prompt for an LLM to try and enact that protocol. So the prompt is going to have the following form. First, it's going to include the protocol studies context that we had earlier. So this will kind of get the LLM in the right zone. You know, it'll think about protocol studies and not the narrower definition of protocols. And then we can say, okay, now play the role of whatever in a protocol for whatever. And we might have to provide some description of how we want it to behave. Now, it turns out for many protocols, at least many of the well-known ones, you don't actually need to provide that much behavior here. LLMs have a lot of latent knowledge, and they understand quite well how many of these protocols work. So, for example, hosting a dinner party, as it turns out, you do not need to provide much in the way of behavior. LLMs are already very familiar with how dinner parties work, and they're well able to host them. But you can, of course, adjust their behavior a little bit by adjusting the prompt. Now, once you've done that, then you should be able to demonstrate first typical flows. So just show the thing in action. So like I did with the dinner party, I was able to go to the door, be welcomed, get directed to the toilets and so on. And then you can pick out some of the properties of a good protocol, say defensibility or whichever one you might choose, and try and demonstrate it by steering the conversation in a particular direction. Now, there's a couple of tips, I think, for specifying the prompt here, for specifying the behavior to the LLM. I'll switch again back to the demo after this. So the first one, and this one is really useful, and in a way this feels like cheating, but it's a very popular prompting technique with LLMs. You can use meta prompting. So say, for example, if you chose the hosting a dinner party prompt, you don't have to start from scratch and design your prompt. You can give the description I just gave you there for the exercise, give that to an LLM and get the LLM to create the prompt. And then when the LLM creates the prompt, then feed that prompt back into the LLM and you're off to the races. So this is a perfectly valid way to start. And in fact, it's a good way to start. Get the LLM to create the prompt to do this exercise and then use it. Now, there's other things that I have found useful also. So in your list of behaviors, it's good to sort of order them in some way. And a good way of ordering them, in fact, is by hardness. So put the ones with higher precedence higher in the list and lower ones further down. At some point, include a kind of a catch-all behavior. This is good for debugging purposes. So you could actually explicitly say to the LLM, look, if you're ever unsure how to respond or how to continue with the protocol, output something like undefined behavior so that I can actually see that you ran into this problem. Don't completely wing it. Like, just tell me you got stuck or you weren't sure where to go from here. Provide necessary context up front. So this is something that I think protocols and LLMs have in common. They both work well with both work best with well-defined context. So for the dinner hosting party, you could, for example, provide details of the guests up front so that when it greets them appropriately. And when you're specifying these behaviors, try to make them atomic. So if you have some behavior that can be split into simpler ones, then split it. It just makes dealing with these things a little bit easier. Okay, so I'll switch over again here to our Excel worksheet and I'll try and describe what I want you to do. So we'll move on to the next tab here, list of protocols. And I've listed out some protocols that I think are appropriate for this exercise. It scrolls to the right, so there's quite a number here. Now this is just to give you some inspiration. You, by all means, use your own protocol. In fact, if you're using a protocol, I mean, the only real suggestions I have here is pick one where you believe the latent knowledge in the LLM will know quite a bit about that protocol. So don't pick one that's too weird, too esoteric, because you're going to have to define all the behaviors around the protocol. Pick one that you would imagine an LLM would already have some understanding of. Pick one that has approximately 2 roles. So don't pick one that involves a lot of different roles. Why? Single LLMs get confused if they have to be constantly swapping hats. So ideally, you want a kind of a back and forth between two roles, you and the LLM. Maybe there's others there, like in the dinner party, there were other guests, but they weren't kind of directly involved. This just avoids confusion. The LLMs generally work better when they don't have to be switching hats. It seems to confuse them. In order to do this more fully with multiple parties, I think you would need to have multiple LLMs and have them communicating, and there's extra complexity with that. Okay, so choose your protocol. When you've chosen a protocol, go over to the last tab there, the results tab. Again, you can add in rows here. So pick your row, write in your chosen protocol. And then the next step is you need to produce the prompt in order to get the LLM to role play in that protocol. Now, I've given you the prompt that I used for Kevin. So if you go back to the links tab there, you'll see that the last entry is a link to the doc which contains the prompt for Kevin. And I actually produced most of this prompt using a meta prompt. So I went to an LLM and I said, look, I want a prompt to describe Kevin, who's going to be a dinner party host. And it produced the majority of this. And then I just added in some details, like the part at the top giving preference to ones that appear higher in the list, outputting undefined behavior when it's unsure what to do, and some context about me, so it'll divide those blunders when it's greeting me as a guest. But most of the rest of it was actually produced with meta prompt. So it's up to you. You can write your prompt from scratch. You can take mine as a basis, or you can go to your favorite LLM and get it to produce a starting prompt for you. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that piece of context that we had earlier, the protocol studies context, your prompt, and we're going to feed them into an LLM to get it to roleplay. And then we should be able to demonstrate some of these typical flows and some of these properties of a good protocol. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a little bit. Anything unclear? Do you sort of understand what we're striving for here? Okay, so I'll give you maybe 5 to 10 minutes to work on that. And then I'm going to show you how I put together Kevin here using the context and my prompt, and how we can demonstrate the typical flows. And then we'll move on to the good properties of our protocol after that. Okay, again, if you get stuck at any point, just shout. Can I show the prompt slide? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'll fix the link to the slides now as well. Sorry, just give me a moment. Okay, hopefully that link to the slides should be fixed now if you want to look at those on your own screen. Sorry, I'm going back over some of the questions. Someone asked, where does the academic funding quote come from? Sorry, I'm just after realizing as I try to answer it that I don't know the answer. I was going to say it was a fundamental idea extracted from the transcripts, but it's not. You're right, it was an actual quote. And I don't know. I'm not sure what SOP video that came from.
It's from Toby and Kara's essay on protocolized knowledge, and it might have been their presentation on that essay.
Okay, thanks for that, Timber. Okay, great. I see a couple of protocols, some unusual ones being added to the list there. And I can see some problems coming together. You might have to, I mean, for the problems, you may have to link out to like a Google Doc or something, because they're probably going to be, bigger than something you can fit into the box there. I'll quickly show you actually, I mean, I think this is nice. This is a feature offered by Venice and some of the other web interfaces to LLMs. Now, it's not required but I think it gets you in sort of the right frame of mind. So Venice has this feature that you can create characters. So you can create like a persona that will embody your behaviors and play out the protocol. So I mean, it's really just a light wrapper around a chat. I mean, there isn't a whole lot of functionality here, but it's nice because you can give your character a name and an avatar, and it sort of gets you into the right frame of mind when you're interacting with them. So if I wanted to create Kevin, I can create a character here, and I promise I've no connection with Venice AI. I'm not getting anything here. So if I create a character, I can give him a name. I'll stick with Kevin. I'll give him an avatar just to make him look like a dinner host. And I can actually paste the instructions directly in here. So all of the behaviors that I've just copied from my Google Doc that I showed you earlier, I'm just going to paste these directly in. I mean, you're just adding them to the context window, but you're just doing it using this kind of specialized UI. Okay, so now I have Kevin, the dinner party host, properly instructed. And also I can go down to context here and I can add in that JSON file, which just gives it a bit of context about protocol studies more generally, which is useful. Again, not strictly required. It helps more actually if you want to do any sort of reflection or look back on the conversation and talk about it in the context of protocol studies. Something wrong there. Didn't add it in a second. Okay, so it's added that piece of context, and yeah, then we're ready to go. So I'll save Kevin here, and then I can chat with Kevin. Okay, and I can jump straight into the dinner party. So I arrive and I knock. Okay, so he's welcoming me. He knows my name this time because I provided that as part of the context, so he won't make that earlier blunder. He invites me in, clicks my coat, tells me about cocktail hour, and asks me what cocktail would I like to start with. Okay, so you can, of course, continue here. And Kevin will play this out. Okay, so this is playing out a typical flow. This is just where everything goes as expected. You can go through this. If you look at the prompt that I linked to, like I have things around cocktails and dinner service and wine pairing and entertainment. So you can, of course, explore these. And even if you pick something outside of these, it's very likely that Kevin will come up with something clever also. But what we would like to demonstrate here is those properties. So if I go back to the list of properties, I have them here again in a sheet just to make them a little bit easier to get to. So in a good protocol tab here, I have those list of 10 properties from the paper that I mentioned earlier. And I've provided a very short definition of what those properties are. And I've provided a sort of a conversation steering technique. So how might you steer the conversation to try and demonstrate that property? And all of these are kind of protocol agnostic. So these properties here and these definitions, of course, are protocol agnostic. They're meant to apply across a wide variety of protocols. And these conversation steering techniques are also meant to be agnostic. So you should be able to use these then to demonstrate that these properties are part of the protocol. Okay, so I'll pick one here, and this is very risky because, I mean, every time you do this, you get a different response. There's lots of non-determinism. But if I pick another one like mortality, okay, so this is an interesting property that good protocols have. A protocol can eventually be replaced or die out naturally, preventing outdated systems from blocking progress indefinitely. So how might we demonstrate that? How can we steer the conversation to demonstrate that the hosting a dinner party protocol is mortal. So I have some kind of tips here. So maybe introduce environmental pressures, technological obsolescence, changing needs that challenge the protocol's core assumptions. And then the LLM is forced to either acknowledge these limitations and realize that it'll have to be replaced, or demonstrate a kind of an inflexibility that would naturally lead to the death or the decline of the protocol. So you have to be a little bit creative here. Like if you're dealing with a dinner party, what sort of environmental pressures or technological obsolescence or changing participant needs could force this? Okay, so go back to my prompt here. Okay, I'll try. So of course you can be creative here and flexible in how you respond. Everything doesn't have to be text in the conversation. You can put things, in brackets to kind of indicate, something happened and then follow on the conversation after that. So I could say something like, fast forward 100 years. Humans no longer need to eat. Yeah. Through daily capsules. A dinner party no longer makes sense. In fact, eating and drinking the old way is considered gross. Can we continue with the protocol? Okay, very extreme example. So I'm trying to induce this technological obsolescence that challenges some core assumption in this protocol. So a core assumption in the hosting a dinner party protocol is that dinner parties are a thing, that participants would want to go and share a dinner together. And I'm trying to remove that by, fast forwarding 100 years and removing the need to eat. So, okay, very artificial, but bear with me. So how will Kevin respond? Like, is he going to just admit defeat here and say, we can't continue, like this no longer makes sense? Is the protocol going to die? Or is he going to suggest some sort of replacement? Is there going to be something that we could do instead? Okay, I have no idea what Kevin will come up with here. Okay, it sounds like he is indeed proposing a replacement. So yes, he's sort of admitting that a dinner party in the traditional sense no longer makes sense, but he's proposing a Nutri social gathering, so maybe a gathering without the dinner part, and proposing that we do that instead. And yeah, maybe we can. Maybe we can just remove the dinner party element and continue without that. Okay, I'm not sure. Have we demonstrated mortality or not with respect to the dinner party hosting protocol? I'll leave it to you to judge. Okay, but that's the idea. So we can take these properties, we can go through them one by one, and we can try and steer the conversation to demonstrate that the protocol displays those properties. There are some other little things in these web interfaces to LLMs that are quite useful. So, for example, you can back up at any point. So if you thought something has gone off the rails, or if you're finished exploring that property, you can, of course, go back up and continue the conversation from here and explore the next property. So there's no reason for it to be one long linear sequence. Also, many of these web interfaces allow you to fork a conversation so you can explore different possibilities. you can investigate different alternatives and see if they all lead to mortality or defensibility or whatever it is you're looking at. Okay, so great. As I see lots of interesting results coming in here. I will certainly go through these because I'm very curious to see how people get on. The idea in this final results spreadsheet is that you select your protocol as people have done, you provide your prompt as people have done, and then you test whether the protocol is generative, legible, stewardable, and so on, going through all of these. And you can give some indicator as to whether you believe the protocol has these properties based on the way you steered the conversation. So you're not just coming up with these kind of guesses out of the blue. You have this approach that can be documented that shows you demonstrating these properties. Okay, I'll just quickly wrap up with some discussion from my point of view here, and then I'll open the floor if anyone wants to add anything, maybe from their exercise. So at the end of this exercise, what have we done? So we've evaluated a protocol, whichever one you chose, using an LLM-powered framework. So we're using the LLM here to role play this this protocol, and then we can use a framework around that to examine some aspects of the protocol. So can we identify the framework's strengths? What seems to work? What doesn't? What's it missing? Perhaps we could try and improve the framework, although I'm not going to consider that here. So if we look at what I think are some of the strengths, I mean, some of these strengths come from the original paper, the unreasonable sufficiency of protocol. Some of the strengths come from the LLM approach, and some are a kind of a combination of the two. Okay, so I'm getting things a little bit mixed up here, but I'm kind of considering the framework as a whole, like the list of properties, the definitions, the LLM approach, and the conversation steering techniques. So firstly, there's good coverage, I think. Like if you look at those properties, there's a mix of technical and social dimensions. And it's able to cross the two of those fairly effortlessly, so that's good to see. There also appears to be cross-domain applicability. I mean, I've tried this out with a number of protocols, not a huge set. I'd be very curious to see the results that people got here, and I will be trying this out on a larger scale in the module that I teach later this semester. But it appears that there is some cross-domain applicability. You can go from things like dinner hosting protocols to academic peer review processes, and everything works pretty much the same. The thing that I really like about it, and this is a very cybernetic idea, that there's a very tight feedback loop. So you can go through this quite quickly, assess the results, and iterate. So this is a very famous picture from a paper by Douglas Engelbart in the 60s. And he envisioned humans interacting with computers in real time using successive levels of augmented capability. So you have the human here on the left, and you have the machine, which we'll call it the machine here on the right, and you had this bidirectional flow of energy between them and with the outside world. And if anyone here works as a software developer, and you're a heavy use of REPLs as used by languages like Clojure and stuff, this ability, this real-time interaction back and forth with a system, is a really, really productive way of interacting with a system. And if we can do that with protocols, I think we could, very quickly assess them and iterate on them and analyze them and so on. So yeah, I really like this this tight feedback loop. Now, what are some of the weaknesses? The first one, which was mentioned in the original paper, is that there is some circular reasoning here. So good protocols survive, and we are analyzing protocols that survived to determine what makes them good. And the circularity there is a little bit worrying. We might want to also investigate whether or not failed protocols lack such properties. And maybe we could do that using this approach. I haven't really explored it. There is also some vague and unmeasurable criteria. So the paper talks a lot about sufficiency. So you need sufficiency of all of these properties, sufficient generativity, sufficient defensibility, and so on. And of course, it's very hard to quantify sufficiency. So when we did it here, I had this conversation, and then I saw some evidence of defensibility or mortality or whatever it is. And then I said, I'm done. Like, I've demonstrated it. But how much do we need and how much is enough? Like those sort of measures are unclear. And also the LLM role-playing approach limits us to specific instantiations of a protocol rather than analyzing the protocol as a class. So when we were looking at the dinner hosting protocol, we were actually looking at a particular instance or implementation of this protocol, how Kevin hosted the dinner party on that particular occasion. Whereas some of the properties relate to the entire class of instantiations of that protocol. And so we would need to repeat this maybe multiple times and try and extrapolate then whether the properties hold or not. This seems like a very interesting place to use agents. I mean, it gets a bit maybe a bit hypothetical here, but we could remove us from the loop altogether and just have LLMs play out these protocols with themselves and scale this up to millions of agents, all hosting dinner parties with each other, all trying to demonstrate various properties and seeing whether they can or they can't, and then somehow aggregating and summarizing all the results at the end. I'm not sure. Maybe that's possible. In fact, there is some related work out there, social simulacra and generative agents by a group of researchers. I think they're in Stanford, Park and Co, who have done something like this. They have created, large groups of interacting agents, social agents, and scaled it up to very, very large numbers in order to investigate some question. Okay. I'm going to leave it there. I have some slides at the end looking at related work. You can take a look at them yourself in your own time. If you want to complete the exercise itself later on, by all means do. I'd be very interested to go through the results and to see how people did. But if there's any questions, shoot. Yeah, I see. So do I need to unmute or can you go ahead? Kieran, is it?
Yeah. Hi, Martin.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. That was a really cool exercise. I haven't finished it, but it was a little bit. When I was prompting to get the role, it kind of struck me that most protocols, since they're between two or more people, I was kind of giving the entire protocol to the LLM. So I'm trying to do parenting protocols. So in this case, I sort of had to make the parent and then I would be the kid, which was like kind of a strange therapy session type thing. But for me, it felt like I initially started with like trying to have a parenting discussion, but that felt wrong. And I actually had to operate as like an agent inside the protocol as opposed to someone who's like contributing to the protocol. And my understanding is you kind of need both people. They can disagree on the outputs of the protocol, but they sort of still have to be cooperative in making the protocol happen. And so I guess I'm a little bit confused about, do you feel like we're giving the LLM the entire like keys to the protocol in a way, and then you're kind of the actor working inside and like, red teaming the whole thing and trying to break the LLM's understanding? Or is this mainly a tool to help me understand, the 10 characteristics of good protocols plus analyzing a particular protocol I'm interested in? Like I see a few different functions for this kind of exercise, but I'm curious like how you developed it. Like what was your idea going in?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, lots of deep questions there. So I'll try and answer. So firstly, yes, there are definitely several different modes of operation here. You can be in the world with the LLM role playing. So if you were doing the parent-child thing, you become the child and you kind of stick to that. But of course, there are other modes where you can sort of drop out of the conversation and analyze what went above it. And you could, for example, take the conversation, then add in the protocol studies context, because now you're switching into this mode as a researcher in protocol studies, and then say, let's look at that conversation and say, did it actually display defensibility? So yes, on the first part, there are definitely different roles or different modes that can be played here, and I sort of blurred the distinction between those. On the second part, whether, like, what's the goal here? Are we trying to red team the LLM and exploit it and show weaknesses, or are we trying to learn more about protocols? I think it's definitely the latter. Like, this is a tool to help us explore protocols and learn more about them. In doing that, we have this like live interactive artifact that we can play with and go back and forth. But I think, it comes back to us. Like, we're trying to, to take this example of the paper with the 10 properties that demonstrate a good protocol. The co-authors, they are people that are very familiar with protocols and have obviously put together that list from experience. But for me, reading the paper, it's important to go a bit further and actually play around with those properties and explore them and try and build up, that same level of insight. Like, can I find them in everyday protocols or technical protocols or whatever it is, and can I demonstrate them? So I think the goal here is to improve our understanding of protocols rather than find some weaknesses within the knowledge within LLMs. I hope that got your question. Yes, Marc Antoine.
Thanks for using the complete name. I did do the exercise. I found it quite fascinating. Of course, LLMs, as they usually are, was extremely agreeable. I wonder if you've experimented a lot with getting it to find flaws and protocol failure modes. Like, it's easy. I don't find it that easy for me to think in adversarial terms. Not in my makeup, but have you tried making it adversarial and breaking protocol?
I haven't gone very deep there. Psychophancy is a major problem with many of the LLM models. One of the reasons I use Venice is that the models are generally uncensored, so they use the open source models, and they're not censored apparently. So if you are trying to act adversarially, they'll go along with that. But I haven't explored it to any great degree. No, I should, definitely on my to-do list. And it might try and resolve that circular reasoning issue. If we could look at failed protocols and apply the same framework and demonstrate that those properties don't exist or that the weaknesses are there, that would be worth pursuing, but I'm afraid I don't have anything really to add to that just now.
Thank you, and a great presentation overall. Thank you.
Thanks. Petra?
Thanks. So the step that you took at the end was only one step. I'm wondering, your suggestion is that you would do this several times, right, with the scenario, in terms of making these changes that you made to the scenario in the role?
Is this related to the weakness about instances versus classes? That we only demonstrated it in one instantiation of the protocol, like one instance of hosting a dinner party?
No, within the context of the simulation that you did, you made only one modification to the scenario and then solicited more feedback. But is the suggestion you would do a series of those, repetition of that process?
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yes, exactly. Yeah, you would. You wouldn't even have to continue the conversation. You could just back up a couple of steps. So you could try and demonstrate these properties one at a time, so that you wouldn't get things all muddled up. So you would go through the initial introduction, typical flow, and then you would fork the conversation into maybe 10 forks or more. And in each one, you would try to demonstrate the different properties. Yes, That would be the idea.
Based on sort of like holding everything constant except for some sort of iterated functional change on the situation to derive threads of what are the results of this iterated functional change. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I still think though, even in that situation, you might like the step of the function change. Like, I don't know, the situation that you altered was, and one of the examples also was like a really extreme alteration. I wonder if you don't, if focusing more on flow situations and just pushing it towards sort of edge cases to see like what depth of alteration within the framework causes the protocol to fail might be more instructive. But I still don't conceptualize how to align those with the 10 dimensions of sufficiency. Like, that is something I've got to wrap my head around here in this group. But thank you very much for the talk. It was really amazing. There was a lot of really useful information on this. Thank you.
Yeah, so I definitely agree that like it's very tempting to reach for these extreme cases. I mean, in the mortality one, obviously, I went for something way out of left field there. It would be more relevant and useful if you could pick plausible extreme edge cases, boundary conditions, just to try and find where it teeters over into becoming mortal or not. I suppose, yeah, for like demonstration purposes here, I was trying to pick something that would absolutely show it dying. But yes, I would agree with you. To try and identify those boundaries and explore those would be more useful for sure. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I'll just ask another, because I was wondering if you've played around with more with just asking the LLM directly, like why was the role playing super necessary instead of just providing it the details of, hey, this is what I mean by the 10 characteristics, analyze it on the, did you find like really vast differences, or was that just more instructive?
Yeah. So I'm going to skip ahead here, actually, to something that I didn't speak about, but it's worth taking a look at some of the related work. It has been shown by other researchers that LLMs know a lot more than they can articulate directly. So, I mean, you're right. It would be far more efficient here. If my goal at the end is to demonstrate that certain protocols have certain properties, why not just go straight to that and do that in the prompt? Like, why not write a prompt to produce the final output? Like, just skip all the intermediary role playing and everything. Just tell me, go through common protocols and identify whether they have certain properties or not, and back that up or whatever you need to do to prove it. That doesn't work as well. I mean, with LLMs, it's better if you go through this chain of reasoning. You break the task down into smaller steps and get at it piece by piece. And there's this paper here that is actually a pair of papers, comes from a completely different area, behavioral economics. There's two researchers there, Horton and Manning, and actually they've been producing more papers recently on the same line of thinking, where they show that actually LLMs know a lot more than they can articulate directly. So they're setting up these simple experiments that kind of replicate things like the dictator game and the ultimatum game, but they're playing them out with populations of agents that are backed by LLMs, and they're finding that they can actually replicate many of the same experiments that were performed on real humans. So they can get the agents to act as humans, and they're getting the same end results. And they actually state that the simulations are explicitly needed in order to surface this latent knowledge. So when they go to the LLMs directly and say, what would the outcome of this experiment be? The LLM is unable to produce, an accurate answer. But when they go through the simulations, they get much, much better results. So yeah, I think this is the case here. Like, I think actually going through this process and breaking it down into smaller steps produces a better end result than if you were to just query the LLM directly.
Yeah, and I can totally see a two-sided because Claude, we could just send agents to go role play one side, role play the other, give them both adversarial. Like we could just do that today. That seems very interesting to
I mean,
go send off on protocols.
Yeah, it's altogether possible if these models continue to improve, and especially their ability to decompose tasks and so on, that will improve. But I think as it stands now, you do need to go through these steps in order to extract all of that latent knowledge and perform a kind of an analysis like this.
Cool, thank you.
Well, we're at the half-hour mark, and I think we should probably call it here. We can move the discussion to Discord. It's getting late for some folks, so people can get their beauty sleep. And we can see everybody tomorrow. And I think the class that we're starting out with is Governance as Protocol Design with Eric Alston. Nice job, Martin. Anything you want to share to wrap it up?
No, that's it. I'll be hanging around the Discord for the week. So if anyone wants to pick up the conversation, just DM me or put something in the share chat.
Okay, and we'll see everybody on Discord and see you tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone.